Hello, and welcome to the BYU Family History Library webinar series. We're glad you could join us today. I'm Anna Allred, and I'll be your host for this webinar. If you have technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box, and I can address your concerns. You are welcome to use the chat box during the webinar for comments, insights, and questions. However, all questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Our next webinar will be on December 1st, starting your search for your immigrant ancestor with James Tanner at 5:30 p.m. There will be no webinar next week due to Thanksgiving. If you would like to access a previous webinar, please visit our webinar index on our website or search on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are recorded and uploaded by the following Monday for your convenience. We also post links to recordings and other updates on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. For today's webinar, we are pleased to hear from Maureen Brady, who will be giving a presentation on Irish family history research, the essentials. Maureen Brady is a former school librarian and computer educator. She's over 35 years experience with family history research. She's traced her Scottish roots back to the end of the 17th century and beyond, and has also pursued Chicago and the Midwest, the Trans-Allegheny, US, Quebec, Irish, and Swedish research. Maureen has made numerous presentations to Illinois and Wisconsin Genealogical Societies, libraries, conferences, and workshops, including presenting at the 2002 National Genealogical Society Conference in the States and the 2016, 2017, and 2018 Central Florida Family History Conference. She is a member of the Genealogical Speakers Guild, as well as a life member of the Aberdeen and Northeast Scotland Family History Society, the Chicago Genealogical Society, the Ohio Genealogical Society, and the McHenry County, Illinois Genealogical Society. She's also active in the British Interest Group of Wisconsin and Illinois, Big Will, the Chicago Scotch Genealogical Group, and the Lake County, Illinois Genealogical Society. And Maureen, if you are ready, we'll turn the time over to you.
Okay. Hit that. I'm presuming this is what we need to do. Okay. Trying to get my title slide up. Can you see my title slide? Are we good?
Yep, it looks great.
Okay. So tonight I'm going to try to give you a quick overview of how you can get started in Irish family history research if you have not started before, or if you have, perhaps lead you to some new sources you've never used before. I'm calling it the essentials because I'm really doing it at the beginning level, but hoping to give you some new ideas if you've been doing it for a while. The first thing that always comes up is, when did the Irish come to North America? So in the 18th century, it was mostly the Ulster Scots from the northern provinces, the province of Ulster primarily, and they were mostly Protestant. Very few Catholics came in the 18th century. In the early 19th century, there was a recruitment drives in Ireland to bring workers over to help build the canals that were being built all over the northeastern United States. And they were primarily doing that in the South and aiming it at the Catholics, though there were many Protestants from the North that came as well. And then when we come to the mid-19th century, around 1850, give or take 5 years, it is mostly Catholic, responding to the effects of the Great Famine, and they're coming mostly from the middle and southern counties. So depending on when your Irish ancestor first shows up either in the colonies or in the United States, you can get a very general sense of what part of Ireland they came from. I always start with the bad news because I think it's best to do bad news and get it out of the way. So when you're doing Irish research, there used to be a lot more in the way of bad news, but it's gotten better. But first of all, a brief history so you can understand some of the elements that are affecting our history and our records. The English crown officially claimed Ireland as part of England in 1494. So we're talking centuries of English control. In 1536, as a result of that official claim, the Church of Ireland was decreed the State Church of Ireland. That meant that by law, everyone in Ireland had to belong to the State Church of Ireland, which is the Anglican or Episcopalian Church. Even the Catholics were by law required to go there for their baptisms and marriages. How many actually did, though, is a matter of conjecture. In 1603, the new King James I of England, also known as King James VI of Scotland, started planting in Ulster province, Scots and English from the warlike border area. It was very lawless. And he felt that by moving them over to Ulster, he could solve two problems. One was getting some law on the borders, but also planting Protestants in a primarily Catholic area, and perhaps get those Catholics to stop bothering him. That's my comment. In 1649, there was a second English conquest with Oliver Cromwell. There was a rebellion that rose up. He crushed it, and then he awarded all of the forfeited lands from various Irish landowners to the Protestants. So after 1649, the mobility, the landowners, the people with the money and voting rights were primarily Protestant. In 1720, the British Parliament took over the legislative arm for Ireland and dissolved the Irish Parliament that had been meeting in Dublin. So from 1720 on, all laws and controls are coming out of London. In 1801, because of the joining of the crowns, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland was created. In 1829, they did pass a Roman Catholic Relief Act, but that did not have a great deal of effect on the common tenants because most of them were still quite poor and were Catholic and were living off of subsistence-sized land. But there was a Relief Act in 1829, the first attempt to respond to the problems with the Catholics and their unrest. In 1838, as an extension of that, they passed a Poor Law Act, which formed poor law unions, essentially taxing districts, to support that Poor Law Act. In 1845, England began the civil registration of non-Catholic marriages in Ireland. No births, no deaths, and not Catholic marriages. But if it was a Protestant marriage, the civil registration began in 1845. In 1845 to 52, with the major portion of it, 1846 to 1850, we have the Great Famine, when millions died and another millions moved to other parts of the world, not just North America, including Australia and New Zealand and perhaps South Africa. Then in 1850, a Reform Act was passed, partially again in response to that famine, and this now based the right to vote on occupation rather than property ownership. It was the first time the Catholic Irish really had a chance to vote. Not everyone did, but there was a better chance. And then in 1864, there was a civil registration of all births, deaths, and marriages, beginning in 1864, including all Catholic births, marriages, and deaths. The problem is that by 1864, most of us, our ancestors, have left Ireland and have settled somewhere in North America in response to earlier migrations, the famine, or just general conditions in Ireland. Looking at the 20th century, I just listed this on the screen so you can get a very quick overview. The first real uprising in the 20th century was Easter weekend of April 1916. If you are good at your history, you know that that's at the height of World War I. It only lasted about 4 days, and the Irish did not come out of it very well. Then in January 1919 to July of 1921, a little over 2 years, there was the Irish War of Independence, which heavily involved the Irish Republican Army, but there were also guerrilla groups and so on. And that ended in July 1921 with the treaty that established the Irish Free State and split off Northern Ireland. There were many, many people who were not happy with that. So as soon as that was signed, just about, you'll notice there's a little overlap on dates here. Beginning in the end of June, all the way up to 1923, there's an Irish Civil War between the Irish, not between the Irish and the English, but between the Irish, those that supported the Irish Free State formation and those that supported a separate Republic of Ireland. Then in 1949, we finally had the Republic of Ireland established. Now, all of this is very pertinent to when our records are made, where they're stored, and how they're kept. Until 1922, the Irish records followed the English patterns. So, for instance, a death certificate does not list parents. A marriage certificate will only list the father of the bride and groom, and so on. The other part of the bad news is this is a picture from the Irish Times. On the 30th of June, 1922, the people who were supporting the Republic of Ireland had taken a shelter, if you will, in what was called the Four Courts building in Dublin. It was the main government repository, and all of the courts met in this building. You can see here what happened. Some way or another, it is still somewhat under conjecture as to who actually fired the first shell. But a shell was fired into the building and set off the ammunition that had been stored there and the resulting explosion you see the picture of. So what was destroyed in that explosion? What was lost? First, the Irish censuses of 1821, 1831, 1841, and 1851. There are some fragments from 41 and 51, and those are online with search windows to help. But they're really just fragments, one part of a page, for instance, from an entire parish. The government intentionally destroyed the 1861 through 1891 census returns. So the first real census where we get any kind of information is the 1901 census of Ireland, and there's also the 1911. As in England, there's 100-year privacy law on the census. There was also lost just over half of the Church of Ireland registers that had been deposited there. Now, that isn't really mean half were gone. Many ministers did not deposit them. Some of them actually kept copies before they sent them on. But the Church of Ireland registers, a goodly sized portion, were destroyed in that explosion. The majority of wills and testamentary records that have been proved in Irish courts were destroyed, as well as all documents from all of the courts that existed pre-1900. So for those of us who are doing research and our family is not comes over in the mid-1800s or the latter part of the 1700s, you can see how this is going to make it much more difficult because so many of the records we would normally depend on have been destroyed. And finally, all pre-1900 local government records as well. The Four Courts building was, in a sense, the National Archives equivalent in Ireland. Another problem with the bad news is language. We have an Irish-speaking population down in the Catholic area. The Protestants mostly speak English. And then we have the use of nicknames very prominent in Irish records. So as examples, you can see here the forms of McDonough, the forms of Houlihan, some of which are very different, and then two given names where it's Mary Elizabeth and Edna. And those are from my family, and the family did call Edna Aunt Pat, and I've never figured out why. And Bridget was a nickname, but it was also a given name. So when you see Bridget, you have to do quite a bit of digging to figure out if that's the nickname or a given name. And finally, then, these resources that we would normally be looking for are not online, those that still exist. Many of those Church of Ireland registers that were not in the Four Court building, they're not online. Most of the Presbyterian parish registers, especially from Ulster, are not online. Most 18th century records and the estate records, because they are mostly still held by the families that own the estates. Now, the good news is we now have an extensive array of online indices and digitized images and books that especially are focused on the Catholic population of the Republic of Ireland. Not so much Ulster, but very much the other three provinces. So that's a basic history. So let's move on to what you need to know about the Irish records. First of all, the first thing you should try to identify is where did the Irish live? And that is not as simple as it may sound. Here's the map of Ireland divided into Northern Ireland up here and the Republic down here. The records from Northern Ireland can be found primarily at two sources, the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland, called PRONI, and the Ulster Historical Foundation, both of which are in Belfast. And then for the Republic, we have the National Library of Ireland in Dublin. We have a website called Roots Ireland, which is indexed the records at the National Library, and then a generic site called Irish Ancestors, and I'll share all of those with you later. So when you are trying to identify where did my family live, it is not enough to say what county they came from. If you are very successful, you should try to identify all of these place names, but particularly the three with a star: the civil parish, otherwise known as the Church of Ireland parish before 1864, the Roman Catholic parish, and the townland they lived in. And we're going to talk about each of these. These three are your most important, but you really want to try to get all of these because townland names are repetitive throughout the country, and there could be 6, 8, 10 of the same names in various parts. So first, the four ancient provinces: Ulster, Connacht, Leinster, and Munster. The north, the west, the east, and the south is typically how people think of them. But within a province, such as Munster, you have a series of counties. So here's the counties of Munster, starting with Clare to the north, and a very large county, Cork, down here at the bottom. And then within a county, let's look at Cork, we now have the baronies, and all of these have names that may or may not match any other place name within that part of this county or the country. Dew Hollow is used for a couple of different place names with different boundaries, Fermoy and so on. So this is a barony, and you can't just extrapolate that, well, this is also going to be the name of, because it probably isn't. And then within a barony, we have the civil parishes of County Cork. And Cork is so big, they've split it off into the west, the east, and the south within that county. And you can see how many there are, huge numbers. Well, we're going to concentrate up here. By clicking on it, we get this close-up view of the civil parishes of Northwest Cork. And you can see how many. Some of them are very, very small. That's probably a good-sized city. Some of them are very large, as number 19 is very large. Well, if I click on that, I also have the Catholic parishes of Northwest Cork. And I tried to do an overlay, but that doesn't work. This is the parish number 19 is called Clonfert. Clonfert, this parish, is divided into two different Roman Catholic parishes. One is called Newmarket and one is called Rock and Meelan. And you can kind of see the boundary of the county of that parish boundary over here if you take a really good look. Now they don't match and they have totally different names. Rock and Meeling and Newmarket for the Catholic parishes, and this is Clonfert for the civil parish and the Church of Ireland parish. Also looking at the civil parish again, number 19, there are the poor law unions. These are your taxing bodies for the tax to support the poor. And again, you see another whole series of names that may or may not agree with any of the other names we've seen previously. Also, within a parish, now remember, this is all one parish, we finally have the townlands within that parish, and you can see how small these can be. There's over 100, there's 102 over here, but each of these is really what you're trying to identify. Which townland in Ireland did your family live in? And then work up from that. So let's look at number 100. And when I do that, this is the shape of that townland. It's called Scartine Upper. It's 1.14 square miles in size, and it's 729 acres. This townland is only 729 acres. Now today in our thinking, that's a housing development, but it was 1 or 2 or 3, maybe 10 families at the most. So the whole way you put this together from province upwards is we have Scartine Upper Townland in the Kantuck Poor Law Union, in the Catholic parish of Newmarket, in the civil parish and Church of England parish of Clonfert, in Barony Dew Hollow, County Cork, Munster Province. All of those are important for the type of records that were created, where they're stored, when they were made, and if they still survive. The key ones, again, are the townland, the Catholic parish, if it's a Catholic family, and the civil parish. Also, in your bibliography, I gave you this, the Topographical Dictionary of Ireland. That is all available digitally online. And for every parish, it gives you this entry. This is from about the 1880s, telling you about where it is, what the main towns are, and a little bit about the economy of that parish. You can see here, it consists of bog and mountain, and the other half is arable and pasture land of inferior quality. So not the best farmland. So that's in the Topographical Dictionary, which also then can help, especially identify baronies, counties, provinces, and so on. So that's the land divisions that you're going to have to deal with. Again, the 3 most important are the townland, the Catholic parish, if they're Catholic, and the Church of Ireland / civil registration parish. So where did the Irish go to church? There were 3 main religions, not exclusive in any one area, but these are the 3 that most Irish belong to. First, we have the ancient church, Roman Catholic, and most of the native Irish stayed with this church after the Reformation. They did not move to a Protestant church, they stayed with the Roman Catholic. There's the Church of Ireland, that's an Anglican church brought to Ireland primarily by the English aristocracy and the military. This aristocracy as they were granted lands by the king, and the military as they were sent over to put down those roughshod Catholics. And finally, Presbyterian, brought to Ireland by the Protestant planters of Ulster, primarily. The strongest areas of Presbyterian membership will be in Ulster. What records are available? For the Catholic records, they are all at the National Library of Ireland, those that still exist, which is most of them. And they are indexed at Ancestry, Find My Past, and Roots Ireland. Now, all of those are subscription sites, but Ancestry and Find My Past, you can access them at many, many public libraries, as well as the family history centers. And Roots Ireland is a fee site, but you can use it for just a few days. You don't have to pay a month or a year. In the Church of Ireland, the main sources for those records are the Ulster Historical Foundation, the Family Search Research Wiki, and the Church of Ireland records themselves. Some of this is online, some of it is not, and it's mostly you have to look and see. There's no hard and fast rule. And finally, the Presbyterian records, the Ulster Historical Foundation is the main source for those. However, Family Search has begun to digitize them. So there are some digitized registers at Family Search. So these are your 3 main bodies of religion within the country and the accessibility of their records. Now remember, Church of Ireland, over half were destroyed in that explosion in 1922. So finding your Irish home. Now, this is how do you get across the water, kind of, but it's also some ideas of where you might find that home within a county of Ireland. And this is basic research strategies. Write down what you know first. So I started with, this is my stone in one of the Chicago area suburbs of my great-grandparents. And Ellen Jones died in October 1912. And so I took that date and found her death certificate on Family Search today. It was actually through microfilm when I first got it. And you'll notice over here, it tells us that her father is Richard Jones, born in Ireland, and she's Margaret Anglin, or Anglum. I never could decide. And she's also born in Ireland. So we have Irish. We don't have anything beyond that, somewhere in Ireland. And he's a Jones, which is a name you would associate with Wales, not Ireland. And Anglin, that wasn't sure about that one, but here's what I had to start with. So the first rule I have is cast your net wide, wider, widest. I work in a family history center as a staff member, and there's always people that come in, and they're really, some of them are very reluctant to widen the search to include siblings and aunts and uncles and cousins, but it's the only way you're going to solve your Irish where did they live problem. And locate every record for every Irish-born member of the family and their children. We'll see why in a minute. Collateral research is a must. And what's probably true with all research, but in Irish, you cannot have success without collateral research, searching out every known or member or possible known member of a family. So one of the things a family search does that helps with that, this is the general record search that comes up, find a name, on the homepage of Family Search today, the new one. And I can go in there and I can put a place where the family lived, in this case, just Cook County. I'm not going to say Chicago because they may have lived in the suburbs. And then I put in just the parents' names, and Margaret's I put with an asterisk because I'm not sure how that end is, but it's Richard and Margaret. No children's names, no death dates, nothing else, just a place and parents. And when I do that, I actually get a list of everybody in the Chicago Cook County records or Cook County records who have those sets of parents. And you can see the variant on the spelling of the mother's last name, Anglium, Anglum, and Anglin. This is their daughter, Jenny, and this is their daughter, Mary. The key thing here is these are actual death certificates that I can access if I'm at a family history center. And note here, Jenny is not born in Ireland or Illinois. She's born in New York. And Mary is also born in New York, now specifically Rome. This is the first time I found out that the family had been anywhere else than Ireland or Illinois. This is why I'm talking about do wide, widest, widest, and do the collateral. So when I open that up and look at those records, I then went to the 1865 census of Rome, Oneida County, New York. And here is Richard and his wife and all of his children, with the first group born in Ireland, but the last three born in Oneida County. And there is Ellen Jones, my great-grandmother. Before I found this by doing the parent search and family search, I had no idea about her siblings. These people, all of their names have been lost in history. No one in the family remembered them. Then from that, I actually found their arrival record in 1849. Here's Richard and Margaret and the first three children. And then there's another one on the next page. So I was able to go from that parent search to an actual census return, and then finally their arrival in the United States. This now gives me a date where I know anything after that date, they're not in Ireland. Also, and I find this to be key, don't be shy about sharing your brick walls. Now, most of us in family history, we love to tell family stories. But don't be shy about it when you're in a situation where somebody else says, you know, hey, I'm doing family history, and it may be a dinner for a company or something. Do tell a little bit of your story, because you never know who that other person may be researching. So I was doing that one day. I was at the Family History Center, and I was telling my little story about this Jones family that I had been no success for. And one of our patrons overheard me, and he turned around and he said, "Are you talking about Andrew McDonough and Ellen Jones?" And I said, "Yes, I am, my great-grandparents." And he said, "Well, I have a good friend who's also looking for that same couple." Well, he put me in touch with his friend, And because of that, I found the McDonough family Bible that the son had passed on, the eldest son, rather than any of the daughters. And then through that, I was able to get a probable County Kerry, but his death certificate said he was born in Newmarket, Ireland. Well, if you take a look at Newmarket is very close to County Kerry, and that big, huge Clonford parish actually borders County Kerry. So both of those made sense, but I only found it because I opened my mouth and talked about my brick wall. And patience is an absolute virtue. It is going to take time. You're not going to get instant finds on the first day you try this unless you're extremely lucky. So here's what happened with me. The keys to my success for Ellen Jones. Patience, number one. It took me over 30 years. Education. I went to conferences and webinars and read books about how do I do research in Ireland, what are the new databases that are available and other sources. And then just sheer luck of the Irish. My family lived in Chicago and those records were digitized. I shared my story and found that family Bible. And because I do speaking engagements, I actually connected with a cousin I hadn't seen for 40 years who had all the family photos. So these are the things you have to kind of keep in mind. You don't do them in order. You go back and forth as needed, but you have to be very patient. And this is the picture, one of the pictures I got from my cousin. And here is Ellen Jones with her oldest daughter, somewhere around 1912. I love that picture. So where do you look? And this is in your handout. Birth, marriage, and death records, both for church and government, civil records, cemeteries, death notices, and obituaries. And the death notices and obituaries are getting much easier to find in the United States because of the main newspaper sites that we now have. But even for the British Isles, there are two now that do have an extensive list of British newspapers, including Ireland. County histories that give the story of when the person came from Ireland. Occupational records and newsletters, especially if they were a tradesman in a union. Fraternal and social organization records, the Hibernia groups and so on. And finally, family Bibles. And this is not in order. It will depend on the age and time of your family, but you must keep all of these in mind. Have I looked at all of these items? Because somewhere in there will be the golden nugget. And then there is the Irish American Heritage Center, which is in Chicago. And it is, I don't know how much research they would do, but it's worth contacting them to see if they have a list of researchers or if they're willing to look up a quick fact for you. They have a very large library, primarily focused on records and books from Ireland. So looking at online sources, first we're going to look at I'm doing this out of order. These are the general databases. And under, this is on Family Search. And with their new system, you go search and then go down to Research Wiki. And then in here, you would type Ireland. And when that comes up, type Ireland genealogy. And you get this page. And it's much longer than this. This is just the top. But we have some very basic information here. And then links to various types of information and how to search for those, as well as some of the key websites over here. But there's also this online genealogy records table. If you click there, and this is true for all countries and states and provinces, it will break down all of the databases at Family Search, Find My Past, Ancestry, My Heritage, Billion Graves, Find a Graves. It'll break it down by categories so that you can then find some records that you hadn't even known that that database existed. If there's a $sign, that's a subscription site, but the Family History Centers have free access to them. If it doesn't have a $sign, such as, no, I can't find one very quick. Most of these have $signs, but the Family Search ones are free, so you would not find a $sign there. This is an extensive list of websites that have actual indexes to the records, not necessarily digital images, but at least the index. Also, you have a page in the wiki for each of the counties, and this is County Cork because that's the one we were looking at. Again, we can go look at that list of online genealogy records, but over here, there's an outline of what topics are covered. And if I open that up a little bit, you can see we've got 2 discussions of the census, church records. We have some marriage license bonds. That's probably Church of Ireland, but we have Catholic qualification and convert rolls. We have a list of the parishes and the Catholic parishes. We have an Irish almanac from 1880 and 1884, and so on. There's quite a bit here. All of this has information about County Cork, so it's in the Cork list. Under background, I have included GENEALOGICAL, and that stands for Genealogy of the United Kingdom and Ireland. It's just GENEALOGICAL, and they have pages for each of those areas, but I pulled up Ireland. You see a map of the counties first, and then also you can choose your county, and then you'll get a list of all of the parishes within that county that are civil parishes and or Catholic. So you have a quick way of finding all of those parish names that perhaps you can zero in. Here's an example of one of them. I'm not even going to try pronouncing it, but it's in Mayo on the coast, and it includes the town of Westport, gives you quite a bit of information, talks about some of the economic parts of it. This is from that topographical dictionary of Ireland that I showed you earlier. So GENEALOGICAL has that, but also GENEALOGICAL has a modern map of that parish. So you can see where the roads are, and you can also see where the mountains are and ports and so on. So GENEALOGICAL also gives you a current map, quickly finding it. I've tried doing this on both MapQuest and Google Maps, and sometimes they can't handle these Gaelic names. Also, there's a drop down for all of these topics, and you can see one of the things they've included for the parishes of Ireland is a complete list of all of the townlands within that parish. Now remember, some of these can be repetitive throughout the country, but at least now you have a list. So if you find a record and it may have a townland name on it, you have something you can compare to see if, oh yeah, there's my townland, I finally found it. Then there's Cindy's list. Cindy's list has so much on it, but we're going to talk about Ireland. So when you go to her website, be sure you scroll down, and we come down here, and this is United Kingdom and Ireland is the category. So circle the U, click that, and we get United States, but here's United Kingdom and Ireland. And right now, as of today, there were 29,849 websites linked into this list on Cindy's list. You can see she just updated it about a month ago. And it's broken down by topic, but within a topic, let me show you one example. Here's immigration, emigration, and migration, just a selection of what's in that set of records. These are all websites. They are relatively self-explanatory. She does give a description, and somewhere in here, you may find something that would be of use to you, certainly worth looking at. Here's Irish Canadian immigration records, 1823 to 1849, from the period of building the canals to the height of the famine. So there may very well be something there. Here's David Dobson's Irish Immigrants in North America. There's more than 6 parts. That's all listed here with links. So Cindy has a huge variety. Yes, there's a lot at the Family Search Wiki, but this is a different organization. So something you may not spot at the wiki, you would spot here, and vice versa. I check both. It also has a section for the counties. So this is the county of where Westport is from, Mayo. And we've got ancestry, and we've got something called County Cavan. This is actually Cavan. Here's GENEALOGICAL links. Here's Ireland links. You can get all the counties this way. And so you can get a vast material that'll take you days to go through it all, to try it all. Back to the general databases. I'm sorry I had this all messed up. Down here, this is the new search screen that comes up on Family Search. with 3 options. Well, if you go to this one, Browse Places, and you type in the country or state or province, this does not work for counties, countries, states, or provinces. You notice it says it right here. So I type in Ireland and hit my enter, and then I get this page. And it's got a chock full of information here that they've pre-organized for you so you can focus yourself on just Irish research. Now, with this new system, I have bookmarked this page on my computer so I can quickly come to it rather than having to work myself back and forth with arrows. Over here on the left, you notice it's 174 learning courses to help you learn about researching Irish records and about the records themselves. Here's a link to the wiki for Ireland. And if you want to help with indexing, they actually have several Irish indexing projects going on right now. On the right, we have indexed historical records. These are the digital images that have been indexed. You can do your searches. You can see right now they're showing you the first 5, but there are 28 in total for Ireland. And here's some more of them up here, calendar of wills and administrations. This is the end of it. Here's some more of those indexing categories over here. And then after they show you all of the indexed records, now they're going to show you what's in the catalog. These would be items that are not necessarily indexed, or they don't need to be indexed, or they're books or something like that. All of them categorized. You'll notice under birth, marriage, and death, 1,538 different items that have some information about Irish birth, marriage, and death in the catalog at the Family History Library, and a lot of it may be available online. We have business records and occupations, and it keeps going. So this is that first page under Browse Place. That's your choice that you would want to do, and it's a country, state, or province. As an example of what you can find, here's the Ireland Valuation Office books from the 1830s to the 1850s. This is when the tax collectors, well, he wasn't a collector, but he went around and was the tax assessor. And he assessed the land and wrote up field books for it. So I'm going to look for Richard Jones, whose parish, remember civil parish is what you have to look for in government records. He lives in Clonfert, County Cork. So I looked that up and I get a whole bunch of Richard Jones, but here's the one who lives in Clonfert. And it said this was done in 1846, just 3 years before he left. I click my little camera and here's the page, the valuation book. These are the field notes the assessor kept as he walked around that parish. It describes, well, here's the person who's the tenant or owner, and it says it's a house plus acreage, and then a description of what the field is like. Is it, can you grow anything on it? And here's the valuations marked over here for what his tax is going to be, and you can see further noted over here. Cold and moory meadow with coarse pasture. We've got brown clay. We've got cold, shallow soil. It doesn't sound like an ideal farm to me, but that's where Richard Jones farmed and raised his family until 1849 when he came to the United States. Let's take a look at ancestry. It's divided by topic again. These are only to give you an example. You have to go in there and start playing around. Notice there's 7 for census, 31 for birth, marriage, death, 7 for military, and the list goes on. These are things you need to open up. You say, well, maybe that's going to be possible. And you go in and see. It's all things to try. This is in the Ireland page for ancestry. And just use the card catalog and look for Ireland. American Ancestors is the New England Historic Genealogical Society. They have a lot of Irish material because many Irish did settle in New England. And these are the lists of their main references that they have. The Boston Pilot was a local newspaper where missing friends, they called it, but relations and friends would post notices looking for an immigrant who had come over earlier and wondering what had happened to them. You notice that goes all the way up to 1920. We have this at all family history centers. Find My Past, also at all family history centers. You can see the variety here. Ireland military pensions, military records, national school registers, Roman Catholic baptisms. We've got the Valuation office books are here as well. If you have more than one website with the same data, check both because they're different indexers who indexed it and they read the handwriting differently. Children's Employment Commission from 1842, Army pensioners up here. Quite a variety at Find My Past. And then the 19th century British newspapers. Some libraries may have a subscription to this, but we do have it at all the family history centers. And this is not just for obituaries. You can find marriages. You can find when somebody's place of business burned down. You can find all sorts of social type little news bits in this. I have found so much. Unfortunately, not my particular Jones family, but in other members of the family. Then Irish databases, Irish Ancestors. This is johngrenham.com. It's both fee-based and free, depending what part of it you use. So if you go up and you do his browse, you get this list first. So you pick one of them. So let's choose records. And then we get a list of all of the record categories. So you pick another one. And I'm going to do property and valuations. And now we get a list of the 6 items under property and evaluations. Here's the tithe allotment. Here's that valuation record again. But there are some estate records that John Grenham has included on his list. So this is always worth a chance if you know where your family lived, what townland. Rootsireland.ie is a fee site. It's the index to the church records. Usually we get the index is free and the church records we pay for. In this case, it's the opposite. For the Catholic families, this is the index and you pay a small fee daily if you want. And then once you have it, and it'll look like this, here's Ellen Jones, my great-grandmother, date of her baptism in the parish of Newmarket. This is Catholic. It tells me right here, there's her mother and her father. There's the witnesses, and even has a note about the priest. So this is the index. Well, you take the index, and then you go to the National Library of Ireland and their Catholic parish registers. You enter your parish name from that index, and it gives you a microfilm list of all of the microfilms for that parish, tells you how many images are in there. You pick the appropriate one, and here is Ellen Jones's baptism in June of 1845. It's just a single line, but it does confirm that's her baptismal date, and usually those were infant baptisms. So you use Roots Ireland for the index and then the National Library of Ireland to get the actual digital images. The National Archives of Ireland, also in Dublin, here's what they have online. Again, some repetition, but there's also some items in here that are unique to them, such as the soldiers' wills for World War I. There's will registers going back to 1858. We have the Catholic qualification rolls again. Some of this is repetitive and some of it is not. The Ulster Historical Foundation in Belfast, which focuses on Belfast and that area, Northern Ireland, they have 3 sets of databases. The free ones are these 5. Then if you pay per view, meaning each record you find you would pay for, then you've got 5 more. And if you join the foundation, you get access to all of these in addition. So it depends upon what level you would want to join, whether it's free or member, as to what you can access through their website. Also, if you're a member, they do provide research services. And finally, irishgenealogy.ie. This is kind of a portal to accessing other records all over the web, some of it taking you to ones we've already looked at. In the church records, however, At this point, they only have the church records from Carlow, and that's Church of Ireland, COI, the Roman Catholic records from Cork and Ross Diocese, Dublin's all three churches, and Kerry, the Church of Ireland and the Roman Catholic. In the civil records, this last year ups each year. They add one more year to it because, again, it's a 100-year rule. So right now it's 1920, 1945 for marriages, 1970 for deaths. They are working backwards on the deaths to the beginning of the records, and they're going to do the same thing with the marriages. But remember, the marriages do not start Catholic until 1864. And most of the deaths and also only go back to 1864 as the births. Ireland IE also has all of this with one simple search. It searches all of them at one time. It is very basic, but you might find something there you're not finding anywhere else. And you notice it includes Castle Garden and Ellis Island for immigration records in the United States. So that's my records and the ones I recommend you use. Taking a moment to look at the bibliography, I've given you 8 books that I recommend as the basics for anybody's library. If you are doing Ulster, there's a few there. If you're not doing Ulster, I think there's only about 5. But certainly those are ones that I've used a lot, and I would recommend their use. And to close, may the road rise to meet you. So I'm going to stop share. And Anna, do we have questions?
Yes, we do. So I'll start in the Q&A. So Robin McCarthy asked, when will the 1921 census be released?
I'm not sure with Ireland because I haven't seen an announcement. England and Wales are going to have it released the end of 2022. It's going to be a year late because of COVID, they're telling us. And maybe that's why Ireland hasn't specifically released a date yet. And when it is released, it will not be indexed yet, just as our 1951 won't be indexed at first.
Awesome, thank you. And there's another question from Robin asking, did any of the Irish jurisdictions boundaries change at any point, like US states and counties?
They really haven't, going back several hundred years. Now, maybe way back in the Middle Ages, they might have been changing, but they have been stagnant for at least 300 to 400 years. The only change has been that Northern Ireland boundary that was imposed in 1922.
Awesome, thanks. And then there's another question asking, at a previous presentation, the speaker said we should all obtain all versions of John Grenham's book because each one contains different details. What is your opinion?
I would agree with that. The best thing to do, though, is to see if a library has multiple editions rather than you trying to buy them, because the older ones are getting very expensive on Amazon and eBay and so on. So I would get the most recent one because it's the most reasonable in price, and then try to see a library that might have it on the shelf. And then you can take comparisons that way if you don't actually have multiple copies. Like our Family History Center, I think, has 2 different editions. I would also say that that's probably true for several other of the books on my list. One of them is Brian Mitchell's The New Genealogical Atlas of Ireland. He's done a 2nd edition of that. So that would be a good idea to have both editions of that one if you can get them.
Awesome, thanks. And then Terrell Mills asked, what is a poor law union?
It was their method of providing tax money to support the poor within a parish. In the British Isles, well, in England, Wales, and Ireland, the poor laws unions were established within a parish so that that parish took care of its own poor. And they assessed a poor law tax once a year to put into the coffers for the poor. And before they had civil registration, it was always through the Church of Ireland, and it's in the Church of Ireland records as to who got paid what. But that's what a poor law union was. It was the taxing body that they used to collect those taxes. I'm trying to think of something here in the United States that could be a somewhat equivalent. Not a precinct, it's bigger than a precinct usually. It's hard to come up with anything in our system that comes close to that.
Thank you. And you're getting a lot of compliments about how comprehensive this presentation was. And
Everyone?
Linda said you were amazing, best presentation ever. And I will share my screen. All big. Okay, there it is. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Maureen, for that wonderful webinar. I'm just so grateful to have you today. And we hope that y'all will join us for our next webinar, which will be on December 1st. There is no webinar next week. And a recording of this webinar will be made available next week. And you can view that on our YouTube channel or our website. If you have any comments or questions, you can always email us at fhl_webinars@byu.edu or follow Facebook and Twitter. Thank you and have a wonderful week.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, everyone.